The arrival. The Azurian scout ship, Celestial Seeker, glided silently into Earth's orbit, its sleek, crystalline hull refracting the pale sunlight. Captain Zix stood on the bridge, his 4 eyes narrowed as he studied the blue-green planet below. His antennae twitched with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Initial scans complete, Captain," reported his second-in-command, Lieutenant Vela. Her 6-fingered hands danced over the holographic controls. "Atmosphere is primarily nitrogen and oxygen. Gravity is 9.8 meters per second squared, one large natural satellite." Zix nodded, his pale blue skin shimmering slightly. "Life signs. Abundant, sir. Primarily carbon-based. We're detecting widespread electromagnetic emissions consistent with a technological civilization." The captain's upper lip curled. "Technological? Hardly. Look at the primitive structures on the surface. Those aren't the creations of an advanced species." Vela zoomed in on a major city, its skyscrapers reaching towards the sky. "They've achieved some level of industrialization, at least." "Yes, but compare it to Azurius Prime. These buildings are barely more than stacked stones." Zix waved a dismissive hand. "What of their defenses?" A new voice chimed in, belonging to the ship's tactical officer, Krill. "Minimal, Captain. We're detecting some orbital satellites, but nothing that could pose a threat to our shields. Their most advanced weapons appear to be chemically propelled projectiles and crude fusion devices." Zix let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a snort. "The Empress will be pleased. This planet is ripe for the taking." As the Azurians continued their scans, they remained oblivious to a small, nondescript satellite that had detected their arrival. Deep within a mountain in Colorado, alarms began to blare. Dr. Elena Rodriguez jolted awake, nearly spilling her cold coffee. The astrophysicist had dozed off at her desk in NORAD's Deep Space Monitoring Division. Now, red warning lights bathed the room in an ominous glow. "What's going on?" she called out, rushing to her station. Her colleague, Dr. James Chen, was already furiously typing at his console. "We've got an unidentified object in high Earth orbit. It just appeared out of nowhere." Elena's heart raced as she pulled up the data. "That's impossible. Nothing can just appear in orbit." "Tell that to our sensors," James replied, his voice tight. "Whatever it is, it's big. At least 500 meters long." Elena stared at the blurry image on her screen, enhanced from their most powerful telescopes. The object was unlike anything she'd ever seen, a smooth, elongated shape that seemed to shimmer and shift as she watched. "My God," she whispered. "It's not one of ours, is it? Russian? Chinese?" James shook his head. "I've already checked. No nation on Earth has anything like this." The implications of that statement hung in the air between them. Elena took a deep breath, steadying herself. "We need to notify the Joint Chiefs immediately. This could be first contact." As Elena reached for the secure phone, a new alert flashed across her screen. "James, are you seeing this? The object is launching smaller craft." They watched in awe as several smaller vessels, each about the size of a fighter jet, detached from the main ship and began descending towards Earth. "They're heading for major cities," James reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "New York, London, Beijing, Moscow." Elena finally found her voice. "And Washington, D.C., they're making their presence known to world leaders." She picked up the phone, her hand trembling slightly. "This is Dr. Elena Rodriguez, authorization code Sierra 9 Delta 27. We have a code black situation. I repeat, code black. Prepare to initiate first contact protocols." As she hung up, Elena turned to James. "How did we miss this? How did they get so close without us detecting them sooner?" James shook his head, still staring at his screens. "Their technology must be far beyond ours. They could have been watching us for years, for all we know." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. If these aliens were so advanced, what did they want with Earth? And more importantly, what would happen if humanity couldn't give them what they were after? Back on the Celestial Seeker, Captain Zix watched with satisfaction as the scout ships descended towards Earth. "Begin broadcasting the first contact message on all frequencies," he ordered. "Let's see how quickly these primitives can decipher it." Vela nodded, initiating the transmission. A series of mathematical sequences, followed by simple pictographs explaining the Azurians' peaceful intentions, began streaming towards Earth. "Captain," Krill interrupted, "I'm detecting increased activity from their military installations. They appear to be scrambling aircraft." Zix waved a hand dismissively. "No matter. Our scouts can easily evade their primitive flying machines. Continue the approach." As the scout ships entered Earth's atmosphere, leaving fiery trails in their wake, millions of humans looked up at the sky in wonder and fear. In the White House Situation Room, the President of the United States was hurriedly briefed on the unfolding situation. "Madam President," the Secretary of Defense began, "we have confirmed alien craft entering our airspace. They're broadcasting some kind of message, but we haven't decrypted it yet. Your orders?" The President, her face ashen but determined, took a moment before responding. "We can't risk appearing hostile. Order all fighters to maintain a safe distance but do not engage. And get me in touch with other world leaders. We need to present a united front." As dawn broke over Washington, D.C., the first Azurian scout ship descended onto the National Mall, its crystalline surface gleaming in the early morning light. A crowd quickly gathered, held back by hastily assembled police barricades. Inside the ship, Sub-Commander Lux prepared to make history. "Remember," Captain Zix's voice came through the communicator, "these are simple beings. Speak slowly and use basic concepts. The Empress is counting on us to bring them into the fold with minimal resistance." Lux nodded, straightening his ceremonial robes. As the ship's hatch opened with a soft hiss, he stepped out into the sunlight, blinking his 4 eyes at the assembled crowd of humans. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then, a cacophony of gasps, screams, and exclamations erupted from the crowd. Lux raised all 4 of his arms in what the Azurians considered a universal gesture of peace. "People of Earth," he began, his words translated and broadcast through the ship's external speakers, "we come in peace, bringing gifts of knowledge and technology. Your world stands on the brink of a new era. The Azurian Empire welcomes you." As Lux spoke, similar scenes were unfolding in capitals around the world. The arrival, as it would come to be known, marked the beginning of a new chapter in human history. But even as world leaders prepared to meet with the Azurians, a small group of scientists, led by Alina Rodriguez, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. In her office at NORAD, Alina stared at the data streaming in from the alien ship in orbit. "James," she called to her colleague, "look at these atmospheric readings around their ship. Something's off." James hurried over, his brow furrowing as he examined the numbers. "That can't be right. According to this, the area immediately surrounding their ship is—" "Exactly," Alina finished for him. "We need to dig deeper. The fate of our entire species might depend on what we find." As night fell on the first day of the Azurians' arrival, humanity teetered on the edge of a transformation beyond anything they could imagine. But whether that transformation would lead to salvation or subjugation remained to be seen. First contact. The sun rose on a world forever changed. In every major city, Azurian scout ships hovered above government buildings, their crystalline surfaces glittering in the morning light. World leaders, having spent a sleepless night in emergency meetings, prepared to face the alien visitors. In Washington, D.C., President Evelyn Carter straightened her jacket as she approached the makeshift stage on the National Mall. Beside her, Sub-Commander Lux towered nearly 8 feet tall, his 4 arms clasped behind his back in a posture of patience. "People of Earth," President Carter began, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd and to billions watching worldwide. "Today marks the dawn of a new era for humanity. Our guests, the Azurians, have traveled across the stars to offer us friendship and knowledge. As she spoke, Lux's antennae twitched, analyzing the gathered humans' emotional responses. He detected a mix of fear, excitement, and skepticism, all expected reactions to such a monumental event. President Carter turned to Lux, gesturing for him to address the crowd. The Azurian stepped forward, his translated words booming from hidden speakers. Greetings, humans of Earth. The Azurian Empire extends its hand in friendship. For millennia, we have watched young civilizations like yours struggle with war, disease, and environmental catastrophe. Today, we offer you a chance to bypass centuries of hardship. Lux paused, allowing his words to sink in. In exchange for Earth's loyalty and certain resource rights, we will share technologies beyond your wildest dreams. Imagine clean, limitless energy, the eradication of all disease, the ability to terraform your most inhospitable regions. A murmur ran through the crowd. Even the most skeptical humans couldn't help but be enticed by such promises. We ask only that you accept your place within the greater galactic community, Lux continued. Under Azurian guidance, humanity will flourish as never before. As the speech concluded, thunderous applause erupted from the crowd. President Carter shook one of Lux's hands, smiling for the cameras. But behind her diplomatic facade, doubts gnawed at her mind. Thousands of miles away, in the depths of Narration, Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the broadcast with growing unease. It all sounds too good to be true, she muttered. Dr. James Chen nodded in agreement. And if something sounds too good to be true, it usually is, Elena finished. She turned back to her computer, where complex simulations ran continuously. James, look at this atmospheric data again. The composition around their ships is subtly different from Earth's normal atmosphere. James leaned in, frowning. Higher oxygen content. But why would they need that? Elena shook her head. I don't think it's for them. I think it's for us. Notice how every human who's been in prolonged contact with the Azurians seems energized, more compliant. You think they're drugging us with oxygen? James asked incredulously. Not drugging, exactly, but optimizing us, making us more receptive. Elena's fingers flew over the keyboard. We need more data. And we need to warn someone before these negotiations go any further. In New York, the United Nations General Assembly had convened an emergency session. Representatives from every nation crowded the chamber, their usual divisions forgotten in the face of this unprecedented situation. Captain Zix, flanked by a delegation of Azurian diplomats, stood at the podium. His voice, deeper and more authoritative than Lux's, filled the chamber. Esteemed leaders of Earth, the Azurian Empire has watched your world for many cycles. We have seen your potential, but also your strife. Today, we offer you unity. Imagine a world without borders, without conflict, a world where every human can reach their full potential. As Zix spoke, holographic displays sprang to life around the chamber. They showed gleaming cities with impossible architecture, lush forests reclaiming once barren deserts, and humans working alongside alien species on distant worlds. This can be your future, Zix continued. But such a future requires sacrifice. We ask for your trust, your loyalty, and yes, some of your world's resources. But what we offer in return will transform your civilization overnight. The UN Secretary-General stepped forward. Captain Zix, while your offer is undoubtedly generous, surely you understand our need for caution. How can we be certain that submitting to Azurian rule is in humanity's best interest? Zix's 4 eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. A fair question. We do not ask for blind faith. Over the coming days, we will demonstrate the benefits of our technology. You will see with your own eyes what awaiting your species. As the session continued, delegates whispered amongst themselves. The promise of world peace and technological marvels was tantalizing. But the price, Earth's autonomy, gave many pause. Back in Washington, President Carter sat in the Oval Office, her advisors arrayed around her. The Secretary of Defense, A gruff man named General Hawthorne spoke up first. "Madam President, I don't like it. These aliens show up out of nowhere with technology that makes ours look like sticks and stones, and we're just supposed to roll over." The Secretary of State, Dr. Amelia Wong, interjected. "But think of the benefits, John. An end to climate change, to hunger, to war. We'd be fools to pass this up." President Carter held up a hand, silencing them both. "I understand both perspectives. The Azurians' offer is incredible, but we can't ignore the potential risks." She turned to her chief of staff. "What's the public reaction so far?" "Mixed, Nam. There's a lot of excitement, especially about the medical and environmental promises. But there's also fear. Religious groups are in an uproar, and there have been some isolated incidents of violence against Azurian ships." The president nodded, unsurprised. "And what about?" Her question was cut off by an urgent knock at the door. A young aide rushed in, looking flustered. "Madam President, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've just received an urgent message from NORAD. Dr. Elena Rodriguez is demanding to speak with you. She says it's about the Azurians, and it can't wait." Carter frowned, then nodded. "Put her through." She turned to her advisors. "Let's hear what the good doctor has to say." As Elena's face appeared on the screen, the occupants of the Oval Office leaned in, unaware that they were about to hear information that would change everything. High above the Earth, on the bridge of the Celestial Seeker, Captain Zix received a report from Lieutenant Vela. "Sir, we've detected some anomalous communications from a human military installation. They seem to be analyzing the atmospheric conditions around our ships." Zix's antennae twitched in annoyance. "Troublesome, but not unexpected. There are always a few who resist progress. Monitor the situation, but do not intervene yet. We must maintain our image of benevolence." Vela nodded, but hesitated before speaking again. "Captain, there's something else. Our long-range scans have picked up." "Well, sir, I think you should see for yourself." As Zix studied the data Vela presented, his 4 eyes widened in surprise. "Interesting," he murmured. "Most interesting indeed. It seems these humans may be more valuable than we initially thought." The captain turned to gaze out at the blue planet below, a new calculation forming in his mind. The Azurian Empire's plans for Earth might need some adjustment. As night fell once again, humanity stood at a crossroads. In capitals around the world, leaders debated the Azurians' offer. In laboratories and universities, scientists pored over every scrap of data they could gather about the alien visitors. And in homes across the globe, ordinary people looked to the stars with a mixture of hope and fear, wondering what this new era would bring. But in a secure facility deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Elena Rodriguez and her team worked tirelessly, racing against time to uncover the truth behind the Azurians' true intentions. Little did they know, their discovery would soon shake the foundations of human-alien relations and perhaps the future of both species. The discovery. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stared at her computer screen, her eyes burning from lack of sleep. For the past 48 hours, she and her team had been working nonstop, analyzing every scrap of data they could gather on the Azurians. The rest of the world might be caught up in the excitement of first contact, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. "Elena, you need to see this," Dr. James Chen called from across the lab. His voice held a mix of excitement and disbelief. Elena hurried over, her heart racing. "What is it?" James pointed to his screen, where a complex molecular model rotated slowly. "I've been analyzing the blood samples we managed to obtain from the Azurians. Look at their hemoglobin structure." Elena leaned in, her eyes widening. "That's impossible. The oxygen binding capacity is off the charts." "Exactly," James nodded. "Their blood can carry at least 3 times as much oxygen as ours. And look at this." He pulled up another diagram. "Their cellular respiration rate is incredibly efficient." Elena's mind raced, connecting the dots. That's why they're increasing the oxygen content around their ships. They need it to function optimally in our atmosphere. But here's the kicker, James continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. I cross-referenced this with some old geological data. Earth's atmosphere used to have a much higher oxygen content millions of years ago. Elena gasped as the implications hit her. You don't think? James nodded grimly. The Azurians aren't just visiting. They're coming home. Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Carter sat in an emergency meeting with her top advisors and a delegation of Azurian representatives. The atmosphere was tense, filled with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Captain Zix, his towering form dominating the room, was in the middle of outlining the Azurians' proposal. As a gesture of good faith, we're prepared to immediately share technology that will eliminate your dependency on fossil fuels. This alone will solve many of your environmental crises. The Secretary of Energy leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. That's incredible. How quickly could we implement such technology? With our assistance, you could have the first plants operational within months, Zix replied smoothly. President Carter held up a hand. While we're grateful for the offer, Captain, I can't help but wonder about the cost. You've mentioned resource rights before. Could you be more specific about what exactly you're asking for in return? Zix's 4 eyes blinked in what might have been amusement. Of course, Madam President. We primarily seek mining rights to certain rare earth elements, as well as access to your polar regions for research purposes. The room erupted in murmurs. The Secretary of State, Dr. Amelia Wong, spoke up. That's a significant ask, Captain. Those resources are vital to our own industries and ecosystems. Indeed, Zix nodded. But consider what you gain in return. Not just clean energy, but advancements in medicine, space travel, even terraforming technology. We can help you make your deserts bloom, Madam Secretary. As the discussion continued, President Carter's secure phone buzzed. She glanced at it, seeing a message from her Chief of Staff. Urgent update from NORAD. Dr. Rodriguez insists on speaking with you immediately. Carter frowned. She'd been intrigued by Elena's initial findings, but now wasn't the time for interruptions. Still, something in her gut told her this was important. If you'll excuse me for a moment, she said, standing. I need to take a call. As she left the room, Captain Zix's antennae twitched, a flicker of concern crossing his alien features. Back at NORAD, Elena paced nervously as she waited for the secure line to connect. When President Carter's face appeared on the screen, Elena wasted no time. Madam President, thank you for taking my call. We've made a critical discovery about the Azurians. Carter's eyes narrowed. Go on, Doctor. Elena took a deep breath. The Azurians aren't just visiting Earth. Madam President, we believe they originated here millions of years ago. The President's eyebrows shot up. That's a bold claim. Dr. Rodriguez, what evidence do you have? Quickly, Elena laid out their findings, the Azurians' unique oxygen requirements, the correlation with Earth's ancient atmosphere, and the geological evidence supporting their theory. We think they left Earth when the oxygen levels started to drop, Elena concluded. Now they're back, and they're trying to terraform the planet back to its original state. President Carter was silent for a long moment, digesting this information. If what you're saying is true, Doctor, it changes everything. But why the charade? Why not just tell us? Think about it, Madam President, Elena urged. If they announced they were here to reclaim their homeworld, how would humanity react? This way, they get us to cooperate willingly. The President nodded slowly. It's a lot to take in, Dr. Rodriguez. I'll need more than just theories to act on this. Can you prove it? Elena hesitated. We need more time and resources. And we need access to an Azurian. Carter's eyes widened. You're not suggesting. A medical examination, Elena clarified quickly. If we can get a full genetic workup, we can prove the connection to Earth's ancient life forms. The President was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. "I'll see what I can do. In the meantime, keep digging. And Dr. Rodriguez, be careful. If you're right, we're dealing with a species far more advanced and potentially dangerous than we realized." As the call ended, Elena slumped in her chair, exhaustion finally catching up with her. They had made a breakthrough, but she knew the real challenge was just beginning. On the Celestial Seeker, Captain Zix received an urgent communication from one of his subordinates on Earth. "Captain, we've detected unauthorized access to one of our biological samples. The humans are analyzing our genetic structure." Zix's mandibles clicked in agitation. "How much have they discovered?" "Unknown, sir. But given their level of technology, it's unlikely they've uncovered anything significant." Zix wasn't so sure. These humans had proven surprisingly resourceful. "Increase security around all our facilities and prepare a diversion. It's time to accelerate our plans." As he ended the communication, Zix gazed out at the blue planet below. Soon, he thought, soon their long exile would be over. Earth would be restored to its former glory, with or without the cooperation of its current inhabitants. In labs and government facilities around the world, the frenzy of activity continued. Scientists pored over the limited data they had on Azurian technology, trying to reverse engineer miracles. Politicians debated the merits and risks of accepting the aliens' offer. And in hidden bunkers, military strategists grappled with the terrifying question: what if the Azurians weren't as benevolent as they claimed? But in a secure lab deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, Elena and her team worked tirelessly, racing against time. They knew they were onto something big, something that could change the course of human history. As dawn broke on the third day since the Azurians' arrival, Elena made a decision. "James," she called to her colleague, "get everyone together. We need to compile everything we have. It's time to go public with our findings." James looked at her, a mix of excitement and fear in his eyes. "Are you sure? This could cause global panic." Elena nodded grimly. "It's a risk we have to take. The world needs to know the truth before it's too late." As they began to assemble their report, none of them realized that their actions had already set in motion a chain of events that would bring humanity and the Azurians to the brink of conflict, and potentially change the fate of both species forever. Resistance and revelation. The world woke to chaos. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's report, detailing the true nature of the Azurians and their ancient connection to Earth, had been leaked to the press overnight. Headlines screamed of alien deception and impending ecological disaster. Social media exploded with theories, fears, and calls for both resistance and capitulation. In Washington, D.C., President Carter stood before a hastily assembled press conference, her face grave. "My fellow Americans, citizens of the world," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. "I know you've all seen the reports. I want to assure you that we are taking these claims very seriously and are in constant communication with our Azurian guests to get to the truth of the matter." As she spoke, protests erupted in cities across the globe. In New York, thousands gathered outside the United Nations, demanding the expulsion of the Azurian delegation. In Beijing, the government struggled to contain online dissent as citizens questioned their leaders' eager embrace of alien technology. Deep in the heart of NORAD, Elena and her team watched the world's reaction unfold with a mixture of vindication and horror. "We had to tell them," Elena murmured, more to herself than to her colleagues. "They had a right to know." Dr. James Chen nodded grimly. "But what now? The Azurians aren't just going to pack up and leave." As if in answer to his question, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Elena rushed to her console, her heart racing. "We're detecting massive energy surges from the Azurian ships," she called out. "They're activating something." On the bridge of the Celestial Seeker, Captain Zix stood impassively as he watched the chaos unfold on the planet below. Lieutenant Vela approached, her antennae twitching nervously. "Captain, the humans have discovered our true nature. Our ground teams report increasing hostility." Your orders. Zix was silent for a moment, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. It seems our hand has been forced, he said finally. Activate the atmospheric processors. It's time to remind these humans who truly owns this world. Vela hesitated. Sir, that will cause widespread panic. The humans may retaliate with nuclear weapons. Their weapons are insignificant, Zix dismissed. And panic is precisely what we need. Let them see the power we wield. They'll be begging for our protection soon enough. As Vela turned to carry out his orders, Zix added, and send a team to retrieve Dr. Rodriguez and her colleagues. I want to know how they discovered our secret. Around the world, the Azurian ships began to pulse with an eerie blue light. Massive vents opened on their undersides, releasing a thick, greenish gas into the atmosphere. Within hours, oxygen levels began to rise dramatically. In the rainforests of Brazil, trees grew at an impossible rate, their leaves swelling to enormous sizes. In the Sahara, long dormant seeds burst to life, carpeting the dunes with vegetation not seen for millions of years. But the effects weren't all benign. In coastal cities, people gasped and choked as algal blooms exploded, turning the waters toxic. Wildfires raged out of control, fed by the oxygen-rich air. And everywhere, humans found themselves growing dizzy and disoriented as their bodies struggled to adapt to the changing atmosphere. In the Oval Office, President Carter received reports of the unfolding ecological disaster with growing horror. She turned to her chief of staff, her voice tight with anger. Get me Captain Zix. Now. When the Azurian captain's holographic form appeared before her, Carter didn't mince words. What the hell do you think you're doing? She demanded. You're killing my people. Zix's expression remained impassive. We're saving your world. Madam President, the Earth is finally returning to its natural state. Your people will adapt, or they will perish. The choice is theirs. This isn't what we agreed to, Carter shot back. We trusted you. A mistake on your part, Zix replied coolly. We gave you the chance to accept our help willingly. Now we'll simply take what is ours. As the hologram flickered out, Carter turned to her military advisors. We're out of options. Prepare our nuclear arsenal. We need to take out those ships before they destroy our entire ecosystem. The Secretary of Defense nodded grimly. Yes, Madam President. God help us all. At no raid, Elena and her team worked frantically to understand and counteract the Azurians' atmospheric processors. But as they pored over the data, a new alert caught their attention. Elena, look at this, James called out. The oxygen levels, they're stabilizing. Elena rushed over, her brow furrowed in confusion. That's not possible. According to our models, they should keep rising for days. As they watched, the oxygen levels not only stabilized but began to decrease slightly. Around the world, the runaway plant growth slowed, and the worst of the algal blooms began to dissipate. I don't understand, James muttered. Did the Azurians stop? Elena shook her head, a wild theory forming in her mind. No, it's not them. It's us. It's Earth itself. Before she could elaborate, the door to their lab burst open. A team of Azurian soldiers stormed in, their crystalline armor glinting under the fluorescent lights. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the lead soldier, announced, Captain Zix requests your presence. As Elena and her team were led away, she couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. Something was happening, something the Azurians hadn't anticipated. The question was, could she figure out what it was before it was too late? On the Celestial Seeker, Captain Zix received increasingly concerning reports. The atmospheric processors weren't performing as expected. Earth's biosphere was resisting their efforts in ways their models hadn't predicted. Impossible, he muttered, reviewing the data. The planet's regulatory systems shouldn't be this advanced. Not after millions of years of lower oxygen levels. As he pondered this unexpected development, a new alert caught his attention. Human military forces were mobilizing worldwide, preparing for a desperate counterattack. Zix's mandibles clicked in agitation. The situation was spiraling out of control. He needed answers, and he needed them now. "Bring me the human scientist," he ordered. "It's time we had a chat with Dr. Rodriguez." As Elena was escorted onto the bridge of the alien flagship, 2 galaxies' worth of history and misunderstanding hung in the balance. The next few hours would determine the fate of not one, but 2 species who called Earth home. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reshape the future of both humanity and the Azurians. And at the center of it all stood Elena, armed only with her intellect and a desperate theory that might just save 2 worlds. Turning the tables, Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Celestial Seeker, her heart pounding as she faced Captain Zix. The Azurian leader's 4 eyes bored into her, a mix of curiosity and frustration evident in his alien features. "Dr. Rodriguez," Zix began, his voice a low rumble, "you've caused us quite a bit of trouble. How did you discover our true nature?" Elena straightened her back, mustering all her courage. "Science, Captain. The same science that allowed you to travel across the stars. We may be less advanced, but we're not stupid." Zix's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Indeed. And now, perhaps you can explain why our atmospheric processors are failing." Elena's mind raced. This was her chance to test her theory. "They're not failing, Captain. They're being regulated." "Impossible," Zix scoffed. "Earth's natural regulatory systems were disrupted millions of years ago when we left." "That's where you're wrong," Elena countered. "Earth has evolved. Or rather, we've evolved with it." She took a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "When your species left Earth, the planet's biosphere didn't just stagnate. It adapted. And so did we. Humans and the entire terrestrial ecosystem have become part of a planetary regulatory system more complex than anything you could have imagined." Zix's antennae twitched in skepticism. "Preposterous. You're nothing but primitive apes." "Are we?" Elena challenged. She gestured to a nearby console. "Look at the data. The oxygen levels, the rapid plant growth, the algal blooms, they're all stabilizing. Not because your machines are failing, but because Earth is fighting back. And we're part of that fight." As Zix reviewed the data, his expression changed from dismissal to shock. This shouldn't be possible." "But it is," Elena pressed. "Humans aren't just passive inhabitants of Earth. We're an integral part of its systems now. Our activities, for better or worse, have become entwined with the planet's regulatory mechanisms. When you try to force the atmosphere back to its prehistoric state, you're not just fighting Earth. You're fighting us." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., President Carter stood in the Situation Room, surrounded by her top military advisors. The tension was palpable as they prepared to launch a desperate nuclear strike against the Azurian ships. "Madam President," the Secretary of Defense reported, "our missiles are armed and ready. We're awaiting your final authorization." Carter closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of her decision heavy on her shoulders. Millions would die if she gave the order, but billions could perish if she didn't. Just as she opened her mouth to speak, an aide burst into the room. "Madam President, we're receiving a transmission from the Azurian mothership. It's Dr. Rodriguez." Back on the Celestial Seeker, Elena had managed to convince Captain Zix to open a channel to Earth's leaders. As the holographic images of President Carter and other world leaders appeared, Elena stepped forward. "Madam President, world leaders, please hold your fire. We've made a breakthrough." Over the next few minutes, Elena explained her theory about Earth's evolved regulatory systems and humanity's role in them. As she spoke, data streamed across the screens, showing the stabilizing atmospheric conditions around the globe. "Don't you see?" Elena concluded. "The Azurians can't terraform Earth back to its prehistoric state because we're now part of the equation. Our presence, our activities, even our technology, they're all part of Earth's new balance." President Carter's eyes widened as she grasped the implications. Dr. Rodriguez, are you saying we're immune to their terraforming? Not immune, Elena clarified, but resistant. Earth has spent millions of years adapting to our presence. It won't let go of us easily. Captain Zix stepped into view, his earlier hostility replaced by a grudging respect. It seems we have underestimated both you and this planet. Our models never accounted for such symbiosis. President Carter's eyes narrowed. Does this mean you'll cease your attempts to alter our atmosphere? Zix was silent for a moment, his alien features unreadable. Finally, he spoke. We have much to discuss, Madam President. It seems our return home will be more complicated than we anticipated. Over the next few weeks, a new era of negotiation began. The Azurians, realizing they couldn't simply reclaim Earth as it was, were forced to consider coexistence. Human scientists worked alongside Azurian experts, sharing knowledge about Earth's complex systems. In a historic address to the United Nations, Captain Zix, standing beside President Carter, announced a new path forward. We came to Earth believing it was our right to reclaim our ancestral home, Zix began. We were wrong. This is no longer just our world. It has become a shared world, shaped by the life that evolved in our absence. President Carter stepped forward. And we, in turn, have learned that we are not alone in the universe, nor are we the first to call Earth home. Together with the Azurians, we will forge a new future, one that respects the needs of both our species and the delicate balance of our shared planet. The plan they unveiled was ambitious. Gradual terraforming of uninhabited areas to create spaces where Azurians could thrive, coupled with advanced technology to protect and enhance Earth's existing ecosystems. Human cities would be slowly adapted to higher oxygen levels, while Azurian settlements would be established in the most compatible regions. Months later, Elena stood on a hilltop overlooking a valley where the first joint human-Azurian city was under construction. Beside her stood James, and to her surprise, Captain Zix. It's extraordinary, Zix mused, his voice tinged with wonder. In all our travels, we never encountered a world that had evolved quite like this. Perhaps our leaving was not the tragedy we always believed it to be. Elena nodded. Earth found a way to thrive without you. And now it's finding a way to thrive with you again. As they watched, human and Azurian workers moved together, building structures that blended technologies from both civilizations. In the distance, a new type of plant, a hybrid of Earth flora and Azurian biology, was being carefully cultivated. There will be challenges, James warned. Cultural clashes, political disagreements, unforeseen biological interactions. Of course, Elena agreed. But look at what we've already accomplished. We averted a war and turned potential conquerors into partners. Zix's antennae twitched, and what Elena had learned was a sign of agreement. Indeed, we came seeking to reclaim a lost home, but instead, we found a new one, and new allies. As the sun set over the valley, casting a golden glow on the nascent city, Elena felt a surge of hope. The future was uncertain, filled with both promise and peril, but for the first time since the Azurians arrived, she was genuinely excited to see what that future might hold. Earth, it seemed, had not just gained new inhabitants. It had become a bridge between two branches of its children, one that had left eons ago, and one that had stayed behind to become part of its very essence. Together, they would write the next chapter in the planet's long and ever-evolving story. As night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, Elena couldn't help but wonder what other long-lost children of Earth might be out there among the stars. And when they returned, what new wonders and challenges would they bring? The adventure, it seemed, was only just beginning.